What's going on, everyone? It's Talks with Kenny here. Today we'll be reacting to why I'm not so concerned with racism. Some of you may or may not know, but my belief is not my belief, but my stance is that racism is a minor inconvenience in my life. I don't consider it something a major issue that I would vote on. I believe that at this point, any sort of racism or discrimination that I face is mostly at a personal level. I don't fear institutional racism, whatever that is, or systematic racism. I believe any racism or discrimination that I would face is only at a personal level. I count that as, let's say, a dating preference, or if someone doesn't want to associate with me because of certain things, I believe that, hey, and they live, let live, right? It's their right to associate whoever they want to associate. If they don't want to associate with me, that is their right to do it. But they cannot act upon any hatred towards me, such as, robbing me or trying to attack me based on, it's a hate crime. Exactly. Right. And I believe I have recourse to address these said issues. But there's enough about me. Let's go into why Thomas Sowell. What is Thomas Sowell's solution to eliminating racism? And my take is to stop talking about it when it doesn't apply. But hey, that's just me. But let's get into it.
Few subjects produce more fallacies than race. Among these fallacies are that. Now get ready. I'm going to give you a passage here. Race was the basis of slavery, that racism is the main reason for black-white differences in incomes, and in all the other aspects of life that depend on income. Moreover, there is often an implicit assumption that racism and discrimination are so closely linked that they go up or down together. Now, what you have produced is a handful of outrages, and we'll take them one at a time. How's that? Race wasn't the basis of slavery?
Oh, it's a simple historical matter. Slavery existed for thousands of years, as far back as there are any records of human beings. Archaeological finds suggest that slavery existed before human beings could read and write. So
It's true in the Bible. They used to, people used to slave each other. The biggest slaves were people of the same race as you. In Africa, where there was no boats. Slavery existed before you even knew how to read. There was no boats. There was nothing. Who you was gonna enslave? Someone that looked like you. Either because you invaded their tribe and you won, or because they owe you money and you're like, hey, you're my servant until your debt is paid. It's a human thing. It's not something specific to your race. Oh, only black people experience slavery. And I think this is why a lot of people like Marge Torre has a big problem with Thomas Sowell, is because Thomas Sowell's point out that fact. And he, I believe he's more empathetic than he is about being realistic. He doesn't want to accept that. He's like, yo, it happened to us last. We were the last one to experience slavery. Like, yo, like you talking about other stuff is deflecting from that fact. I can understand, but the reality is slavery is not something specific only to black people. And to teach that in America, that only black people went through slavery, I think is a very narrow, closed-minded argument in my view, because you're not giving a holistic view of slavery as a whole. Like, oh, this is something, it's a human thing. Like, humans did this throughout all history. It didn't only apply to one group of people. But hey, I digress. Let's continue.
But a racial difference between the slaves and the enslavers, that is a relatively new phenomenon. You didn't have in ancient times the ability to go to another continent and move millions of people of a different race across the ocean. So you enslaved the people who were nearby. The Europeans enslaved Slavs for centuries before they brought the first black African to the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, but so you're not...
Yeah, so slavery should not be correlated. Slavery is not semantic with race, right? So that means one race of people doesn't have ownership of slavery. Oh, you can't talk about that because I'm black. Only we can talk about slavery. No, you don't have that. Sorry, black people, we don't have that. Hey, look, you can't get mad at me. I believe we created equal. I don't believe no one is better than me or less than me. So if one group of people is capable of it, I know damn well I'm capable of doing it. It's like me saying that just because I'm black, I'm not capable of cheating. That's literally that's literally the argument they're trying to say, that they're not capable. They should have a say only, like they're the only people that should speak on slavery because they were the last people to experience it. Sure, that's factual. Yes, you're the last group of people to experience slavery, but the conversation doesn't revolve around only on you. And that's my problem. Like, we're not getting a holistic view on this. And people some people correlate or coupled or link slavery with racism, and they're thinking it's just one thing. So that means based on your race, only certain groups of people can talk about slavery, aka non-whites. Only non-white people can talk about slavery, and I believe that's racist. That's a racist idea. And look, I stick to my beliefs. I believe I'm created equal. Hey, I had to call a spade a spade. That's a fallacy. That we have to acknowledge that, hey, racism was separate from slavery. You weren't a slave because you were black. You were a slave because you were already made a slave by people who often made you a slave. Africans made you slaves. Then they sold you to the white people. Whose fault that is? That's Africa. Africa's the originator of black slavery. No one had that conversation though. But I digress. Let's continue.
Not suggesting you do not wish to say anything other than that slavery as practiced in the United States was, it may have been recent, but you'd be willing to grant that it was particularly perverse and destructive because race got mixed into it at that point, right?
Mm-hmm. Race got mixed into it in the United States more than anywhere else for a very simple reason. The United States was founded, as the Declaration said, of independence, said all men are created equal. Mm-hmm. If that's true, then the only way you can justify slavery is to say that some men are less than men.
I
see. And that goes back to what I've been saying before, is that the Constitution America's not founded on racism. I'm sorry. You're going to be hard pressed to really convince me that America was founded on racism, because the Constitution stated plainly clearly, hey, all men are created equal. Racism was created in America, if you want to say that, is because people saw that, hey, there's an inconsistency here. Your founding, right? Your Constitution, the country that's founded on this document, said that all men are created equal. I'm a man just like you're a man. The only difference is I'm black and you're white. And the white person will tell you, oh, no, it's because you are a ninja. That's why you're less than. And this is how racism started. And this is why it's such a prominent issue here in the United States. Because the majority of Americans were using that as a justification for why the law didn't apply the same that it applied to another race. And that's it. That was a human thing. Human flaws. Humans were rationalizing why they weren't living up to the principles of their founding. That was the real problem. Not that America is the problem. It was the people. It's always the people. Because the people are the only thing fallible. Because the people are the only thing living. A document is unchanging. It's been the same since the founding in 1776. And now the Constitution never changed. Sure, you added amendments. But that's because people weren't willing to live up to what was stipulated in the Constitution. And that's why we have those amendments today. Let me know if I'm lying. Let me know. Let me know in the comment section. But that's what I believe. You can disagree. You can be mad. Hey, give me your thoughts, and that's it. Hey, look, this is what I believe. It ain't nothing factual. You ain't calling me a liar. So I'm guessing what he's saying is true. But I digress. Let's continue.
I see. So the racial
but in Brazil, where Brazil imported more slaves than the United States, there was no such ideology. Brazil was not a democratic country. The whole issue never arose.
I see. All right. Race doesn't account for differences in black-white income?
No, the differences between income between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans is greater than the difference between blacks and whites in the United States. Differences in income are the rule. They are not the exception.
So
I agree, because end of the day, I'm in a position where I make almost 3 times the money of the average black man in America. And I don't think it's racism. I think it's because I made different choices. I chose a different career path than what most black men statistically pick. If most black men say, hey, I want to be a baller, right? I want to play in the NBA. What are the probability of those people becoming athletes? Only 450 spots are available in the NBA to be a professional basketball player here in the United States. And there's millions and millions of black men that wants those spots. Sure, the best of the best will come from that group, but also there'll be a disproportionate amount of people who will be left jobless, because skills in basketball is not translatable to other industries and fields. Sure, the mindset, the mentality, the mental framework helps you become successful in any endeavor, but in the end of the day, you still need the skills. You still need something practical to actually gain any type of economic and social class. Now, let's flip that with the Jewish people, who are another minority technically, right? What they focus on becoming engineers, doctors, lawyers. Who has a higher probability of actually obtaining those jobs compared to a group of people whose culture incentivizes them to be rappers and athletes? with low probability chances of success for a large amount of people. And if you take the same group, a different group, and they change, hey, let's make it popular to be a lawyer, doctor, and engineer. They'll have the larger population will have a higher probability of success, and that will increase the average income in the community. That's my take. And race had nothing to do with it. Any disparities that I see, I'm biased to consider that is based on different choices that said person or said group makes on a statistical level. That is my default argument. That I always fall back to, they made different choices. Men and women don't make the same amount of money. They made different choices. Men historically work longer hours than women. If that's a factor, then I always will equate their advantages to the fact that they work at the job longer than women. Oh, it's not hourly, it's hourly. If you work more hours, when do you get more work done? And when can you use leverage the fact that you get more work done than other employees to justify a promotion for yourself? Decisions and choices. That's the primary reason why there's discrepancies. And like he said, discrepancies are the rule, not the exception. But I digress. Let's continue.
Looking at all these sociological studies that show a persistent gap between African Americans in income and every other form of American in income is what? Useless? It tells us things that we don't need to know. It misleads us. How would you describe that?
Wrong, I think, sums it up. It is not true. Hispanics have a lower per capita income than blacks. Hispanic households and families have a higher income than black households and families, simply because the Hispanic families are larger.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, this last assertion, race and discrimination, you suggest, are not so closely linked that they move up and down together. First of all, distinguish the two, race and discrimination.
Racism is an attitude inside people's heads. Right? Mm-hmm. Discrimination is an overt act taking place outside in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my thing. This is why I say racism is a minor inconvenience in my life, or I don't worry about racism. Is because, like he said, I agree with his assertion. Racism is something in someone's head, but if they don't act it out, I won't know if they're racist. Discrimination is something I would worry about. Oh, you're discriminating me based on what? Oh, I discriminated you based on Kenny. The reason why you didn't get this job is because I found someone with better qualifications than you. That's justified discrimination. That's justified. That discrimination is justified. But if he said, hey, even though you're a better qualified candidate, I picked this person because he's white. He just proved to me, oh, you're discriminating me based on my race. I have evidence of that, and therefore I could have some type of recourse. Hey, that's a hate crime. Hey, you're discriminating against me. Hey, you breached Title IX. You discriminated me based on one of my protected class. You discriminated me against on something I can never change. That's what we call wrong, right? You discriminating against someone that's immutable. Like, hey, I can never change this about myself, right? Basketball, we do it. Basketball, if you're a shorter player, hey, you're just gonna get less playing time than someone who's taller. If you two people do the same skill set, but one player is taller, in basketball, being seen as having height is an advantage because the hoop is 10 feet high. If you're a shorter player, you're at a disadvantage. So people are more prominent to pick the taller player. That's discrimination too. End of the day, we should be asking, what's the cost of discrimination? Right? Because at the end of the day, there's a cost. There's a cost to everything. If you decide to not pick LeBron James and you pick the best white player you know, Larry Bird, over LeBron James, your team will still lose because LeBron James is the better player, objectively. Right? There's a cost. If a racist was a coach and he picked Larry Bird over LeBron James, his team will still get smacked around because LeBron James is the better basketball player. That's the cost of discrimination that I'm talking about. And that's the risk that someone who wants to act out their motive, act out racism, will experience. So if you really are the better candidate, the better person, that employer or that person will pay for it in the free market. And this is why I'm a free market capitalist. Go where you're appreciated, not tolerated. But I digress. I'm rambling on. Let's continue.
Okay.
So not only with blacks, you find the same thing with Jews in previous centuries. That part of the United States where there was the most racism against blacks, namely the South,
right,
is where black construction workers were much more common than they were in the North, right on into the 20th century. Most people are unaware that in the South, blacks were the construction workers. I remember a professor at Howard University saying that when he was a boy in the South, his father pointed to some man on the street and said, he was the first first white construction worker in this town.
And so what was going on there? The racism did not. So whites could think of black.
So it's like dying on the hill. Are you willing to suffer a loss because of your ideology, right? If you have the ideology that, hey, women are better at men at sports, right? And you choose a team based on your ideology. Hey, I pick this team of all women, right? Let's say it's the soccer team. You pick the women's soccer team. You say these are the best women, and I believe they'll win the National Soccer League. And I come in with a team of 16-year-old boys, and you get smacked 5-1. Reality tells you, hey, you died on the hill. Yeah, you picked the all women's team. You made a team based on your beliefs, but the reality is they were not the better team. And that's what Thomas Sowell was pointing out in his example, that based on racism or sexism or whatever ideology, misguided ideology you want to use, it doesn't hold. You risk losing something more valuable in reality. If your job was on the line and the two teams had to play, would you pick an all women's team? No, you wouldn't. You'll pick the best player. Meritocracy. You'll pick the best player available. It doesn't matter if it was a black woman. It doesn't matter if it was a man. It doesn't matter if it was a 16-year-old kid. You'll pick the best player for your team. So that way you give yourself the best odds of success. And that's the cost of discrimination that I was alluding to earlier in the video. And that Thomas Sowell, I guess, eloquently presented in front of the interviewer. But I digress. Let's continue.
As somehow or other separate, but they'd still employ them because the market made it profitable to do so.
Yeah, in fact, yes. In fact, a law had to be passed to stop this because in the 20s and particularly as the Depression.
Imagine that. And this is for all the people that so big government. Free market capitalism, when the government wasn't involved, people were naturally doing things that wasn't discriminating people based on race, to the point where people are like, yo, these races, even though they're racist against these people, they're still hiring them at a disproportionate rate. They're gaining wealth. We can't let this happen. Let's pass a law to discriminate them based on their race. And you want more government? Remind me again why black people should vote Democrat again? For state power again? Why should black people trust the government again? When they were left to their own devices, racism had no choice. Racists had no choice but to hire black people because they were the best for the job. They were what was available. But I digress. I let me know if I'm making sense. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section.
Got underway. Black construction companies in the South using black non-union labor would come up to the North and underbid on government contracts, taking them away. And so this was very common, to the point where they passed the Davis-Bacon Act, which said that on government contracts you must pay the prevailing wage, which translated almost invariably into the union wage.
Right. So your point on the distinction between racism and discrimination is, don't worry about racism. It's inside people's heads. You can't measure it. There's a strongly subjective, just forget about it, concentrate only on discrimination, and the best answer to discrimination is to let markets operate, because then people will discover, it will tend to militate against discrimination.
Yes,
when people have skills to offer, they'll be employed. Whatever this notion of racism in people's heads is, don't worry about that. Is that
a racist will pick LeBron James 10 out of 10 times over Larry Bird, I promise you. If you tell them, hey, your life is on the line, you got to pick between these two players. This black man, 6'8", LeBron James, or the 6'6", Larry Bird, who you picking? You picking LeBron. It don't matter your ideology, no matter how you feel, don't matter if you're an avid feminist. If you have to pick the best woman player, and then you pick the best man player, and you say, hey, pick out of the two, and whoever plays, your life is on the line if they lose. You ain't gonna pick no woman. I'm sorry. You could be the most radical feminist I know. You'll die on that hill. You'll die on it. And that's what Thomas Sowell is pointing out. Are you willing to die based on false pretense? Hey, this is the argument that a lot of people are saying with women. Are you gonna hire the best person for the job, or are you just gonna hire men? It's the same argument I can make for women too. If a woman's good at a certain position, you're gonna discriminate against her on her sex. You're gonna pay her at a lower wage based on her sex. And then when she do free market capitalist, I don't think this is the best offer I can get. Let me go see somewhere else. Oh, this place is willing to pay me more. That employer has a choice to make. Do I match or do I let her go? Simple. There's a cost of discrimination now in 2022. And this is why you shouldn't worry too much about discrimination. If you're really that good, free market. This is why I'm a capitalist. This is why I'm so pro free market. But I digress.
Is that right?
Yeah, what I'm saying essentially is that racists may prefer one race to another, but they prefer themselves to everybody else.
So they'll do what's profitable.
That's right. That's right.
Got it.
And
Okay.
that was even true in South Africa under apartheid, that there were hundreds of construction companies in South Africa that were fined in a government crackdown because they were hiring more blacks and in higher positions than they were allowed to under the apartheid law, because that was where the money was.
Free market capitalism was breaking the law. Imagine that. Rebelling against the system, free market capitalism, because like he said, people will do something based on their own self-interest, and this is why capitalism works. If you had to starve to death and let another family feed off of your work, you'll say, hell no, that's taxes. You bring in all this food and people that didn't work at all for that food are like with their hand out saying, can you give us 80% of your food? No, what about my family? You gonna let my family starve so that way I can feed you so I can feel good about myself? That's the tax system, apparently. That's what the state is saying. They know how to manage that resources better than you could know how to manage that resources. But hey, I digress. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I really like to hear them. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.